So good morning, everyone. We are back to the book On the Way to the Light. And we are talking about the time of that it's the end of the 18th century, the beginning of the 19th century, when you have a lot of important things that happen in the world, in different countries. We spoke a little bit about the Jesuitic movement that was very strong at that time. We talked about the what happened in England when you had the famous Bill of Rights and more and more laws away from the monarchy controlling everything were put into practice. With all the backs and forths and the big wars that happened in Europe throughout the centuries. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the Americas here, and then we go deeper in the French Revolution, which is a big part of modern society. It's considered to have all started with the French Revolution, with the ideas and everything. So we're going to start with this Refuge in the Americas. Soraya, they're going to read for us.
Yes. Okay. Refuge in the Americas. Considering the movement of general and isolated responsibilities, the invisible plane, under Jesus' guidance, led to the Americas all the sincere and industrious spirits who did not need to reincarnate in Europe, where individuals and collectivities were becoming more and more bound together by the chain of lives of expiatory trials. All the spirits called them together to organize future progress, flocked to the hemisphere of the New World. Many of them had acquired the sense of fraternity and peace after many struggles on their former continent. Tired of looking for happiness within the narrow confines of exclusivist sentiments, they felt within themselves the generous flowering of edifying reforms as they grasped the true solidarity of the universal community. Thus, from the very first, the political organizations of the Americas became bulwarks of peace and fraternity for the entire orb. This was because, considering the ongoing troubles in Europe, living on the Americas' soil and the hidden light of their social climate was regarded by all spirits as blessing from God.
Okay, so what Emmanuel is trying to explain to us here, it's a little bit about the colonization of the Americas and what spirits came to the Americas. Came in the sense that were other immigrated in the beginning and then were born in the Americas. So the Americas, we're talking about South America, Central America, North America, the New World, as it was called in those days. Looking from the spiritual point of view, what happens as we evolve is that we acquire debts for our mistakes. And centuries and centuries of wars in Europe, of course, created consequences for all those spirits in position of leadership or in position of making decisions. And these spirits would reincarnate amongst their peers and face the same challenges. And the evolution and the changes were very slow. So some of the spirits that had less responsibility for their actions, because you have as much responsibility as you know what you were doing, and as much responsibility as you have power of decision to make, power of making the decisions that generate the consequences. So what Emmanuel is telling us that many of those spirits that didn't have that many let's say, karma with the old world and were evolved enough to prepare a new soil for the world to evolve, were then either chose or were sent to reincarnate in the Americas to start a new path for humanity. And of course, when we look back in this part of the world, in the Americas, we see that it had walked a slightly different path from the old world, from Europe, right? We're not going to discuss much of Asia here, but because nothing much in terms of migration at that time happened there. It was basically from Europe to the Americas, right? So the spirits that were brought to America were spirits that were prepared to start a new path, a new journey. Again, always reminding ourselves that we have free will. So we're not going to say that all the spirits that came here were successful in their tasks. A lot of them went back to their old habits, old errors, and that's why, you know, we see stains in the evolution of the Americas, especially with slavery, right? But the ideas that flourished especially in this country, here in the US, ended up serving as a model that went back to France, that we are going to study soon, with these new souls that came to the Americas to escape the recurring problems that were contaminating them in Europe. And you know, jumping a little ahead, when we talk about Spiritism, that was born in France and was very strong in Europe and France in the end of the 19th century, and that ended up being transferred to Brazil. Mostly why this happened are the same thing, right? Because it became contaminated and damaged by the two big world wars in Europe, and in Brazil you had a safe place to preserve Spiritism and then to start spreading throughout the world again. So going back to what happened in the Americas, we see, as Emmanuel says here, that the beginning of something new happened in the Americas. Of course, you know, where the spirits are still the same spirits that were reincarnating in Europe, just reincarnating in a different place. So a lot of the imperfections, we don't get rid of them just because we were born in a different place. So a lot of the challenges that we had, we're still having when we reincarnated in America. But in terms of reincarnations, we know that the Americas, we see the reincarnation of the Romans, of the Roman Empire. And I mentioned this more than once. You'll just have to look at the monuments and the buildings in Washington and compare to Rome, and you'll see the similarities of the constructions and the architecture. So we can see there the Romans reincarnating in America and bringing the ideas of the Roman Empire that were very forward-thinking for the time in terms of law, in terms of a lot of other, the organization. You know, the first republic happened before the Roman Empire. So the ideas of republic and the ideas of democracy that comes from the old Greece, from Athens, that moved a little bit into the Roman Empire, end up being brought here to to the Americas, especially here in this country, in the US, and spreads throughout the world later in different forms. So that's what Emmanuel is trying to tell us here, the reasons why the New World, the future progress flocked to the New World. Europe was struggling to progress and to rid itself from the wars, from the feudal system and all these other things that eventually we're going to look now how they got rid of it. But that's what Emmanuel is trying to tell us here, okay, in this chapter. Any comments, questions here? Okay, so this was the only part that we're going to talk about, a little bit about America. Then we move back to Europe, and we're going to discuss a lot about Europe the rest of the day. So if you have any questions relating to this movement to the Americas, that's now. But anyway, otherwise, let's go on, move on. Zoraida.
Okay, the Encyclopedists. The 18th century began with equally renewing struggles. High-order spirits of philosophy and science, who reincarnated chiefly in France, would fight against the errors of society and politics, upending the principles of divine right, in whose name all sorts of barbarities were being committed. Among this plethora of reformers were the venerable figures of Voltaire, Montesquieu, Rousseau, d'Albert, Diderot, and Gesner. Their benevolent teachings reverberated in the future United States and throughout the rest of the world. Amidst titillations of sentiment and genius, they were the industrious instructions of the spirit world for the regeneration of Earth's collectivities. There are some historians who, in a characteristic desire for sensationalism, are not ashamed to state that these studious and wise spirits were paid by Catherine II of Russia and the monarchs of Prussia to undermine the integrity of France. But such statements are slanders that only affect those who make them, because it was the sacrifices made by those generous souls that lit the divine spark of thought and liberty, the substance of all the social victories that made modern people proud.
So, what are these encyclopedists? We all know about Encyclopedia, and when we talk about encyclopedias, for those of us that are a little older, we remember the encyclopedias that we had in our parents who buy encyclopedias for us to study. We used to consult the encyclopedias to study. And this all started here in the 18th century in France with the Encyclopedists, as they say here. So the Encyclopedia was a general encyclopedia published in France between 1751 and 1772. And then later supplements, revised editions, and translations. But it's the basic for all modern encyclopedias that we have today. It was the origin of it. You see these names here that Zoraida was trying to struggling with those French names. Yeah. Diderot was the main responsible for the encyclopedia. Was the one that took care of it from beginning to end. It was edited by him. In the beginning, it was co-edited by d'Alembert, Jean-Léon d'Alembert. But of course, the encyclopedia was trying to move away from the domination of and imposition of church. That at that time the church ruled France. It was inside the court and the monarchy, and church owned a big part of the Catholic Church, a big part of the land in France, and dictated what could and what could not be taught, what could be learned, and what was hidden. So what happens here is that Diderot, who was a philosopher, art critic, and he was a prominent figure at the Age of Enlightenment, which was an intellectual and philosophical movement that dominated the world of ideas in Europe during the 17th and 18th century. The Enlightenment included a range of ideas centered in the pursuit of happiness, of reason, in the evidence of the senses as the primary source of knowledge, and advanced ideas such as liberty, progress, toleration, fraternity, constitutional government, and separation of church and state. You see by this that this is all very against what was going on in the government in France. So, of course, in 1758, it was banned by the Catholic Church. And in 1759, it was banned by the French government. But this ban was not really strictly enforced. And they continued to be published and written. The Encyclopedia it contains well, the number here of the number of volumes. It's I forgot here, and I can find in the number of volumes here. Anyway, it's an encyclopedia. It has many volumes and talks about all these different subjects that were considered prohibited by church, right? So it talks about science, it talks about mathematics, and it talks about politics, liberty, addresses a lot of these different subjects. So, for instance, D'Alembert, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the names here and what they cover in the encyclopedia. So the first one you have here is Voltaire, of course, a very important name in the French Revolution. He wrote in the encyclopedia about history, literature, and philosophy. And then you have Montesquieu, that was also an important figure that wrote about science. And then you have Rousseau, that wrote about music and political theory. You have Diderot was the main editor, and also wrote about economics, mechanical arts, philosophy, politics, religion, and many other things. And then you have Quesnay, that wrote on tax, farmers, and grain. So all these created a lot of religious and political controversies because it challenged religious authority.
Yeah.
They did not reject religious claims, but they started asking for theology and the notions of God to be proved. Mm-hmm. They criticized superstition. They started talking about politics and society, science and technology. So it was really what ended up leading to the French Revolution. Mm. It was what fomented the English Revolution. 35 volumes. Thanks, Luis. Yes, actually, I found here. So it was 17 volumes of articles issued from 1751 to 1765, 11 volumes of illustrations from 1762 to 1772, 20 million words in total, 75,000 entries. Now, can you imagine this being published in the 1700s, where the cost of publishing anything was so expensive, and they had they published it a lot of editions. In the end, they had a lot of editions published. Now, just to address a little bit the comment by Emmanuel on Catherine II of Russia. So, of course, I said before, Diderot was banished, was persecuted. The church didn't approve it. The monarchy tried to persecute it. So Diderot ended up having what? No money, right? And being struggling to survive. So some of Europe monarchs, especially Catherine II of Russia and some Prussia at that time, it was divided in a lot of small monarchs. And a lot of these monarchs, they gave the financial support for Diderot to continue doing his work. But especially Catherine II was the one that took him to St. Petersburg at a point in his life. Then he went back to France to continue publishing it. So, of course, he was accused of being a puppet of Catherine II. And this, in reality, if you study what the works and what really happened there, she didn't have any influence on what was written. He had freedom of writing, and there are the other ones that wrote articles also had freedom to write as much as possible, of course, because you can imagine that it was not easy to publish things there, right? So again, it was the basis for what would eventually be here the American Revolution, and the basis for what would happen in Europe, the end of the Renaissance and the liberation from the domination of church and of monarchy. So you have Adam Smith, the famous economist from Scotland, that wrote also on this encyclopedia. And in the encyclopedia, in the end, is it's what the basis for all the other encyclopedias that were published later in the world served. The model was this first encyclopedia. And when we talk today about Wikipedia, which is the source that everybody looks on the internet for looking for information and understanding, it all started with these encyclopedists. So we have to thank Monsieur Diderot for carrying out the work, despite the others that tried to prevent, and publishing the encyclopedia that became really a very important part of human knowledge and human progress at the time, at the so-called end of this Age of Enlightenment, that it is said that it started with René Descartes in 1637, also with Isaac Newton's 1687, which is in the end the culmination with the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment. So it's considered the Age of Enlightenment is considered to start with the death of Louis XIV in France, and it finished with the French Revolution, the beginning of the 19th century. Okay. Mm. These are the encyclopedists. Any comments, questions here? It's important for us to understand where it all comes from, because especially here in the US, we learn a lot about the American Revolution, right? And the ideas that were used by Benjamin Franklin, by Thomas Jefferson, and those that, and actually we're going to go back to them in the next item. A lot of their ideas are based on these articles in the encyclopedia that they found and learned in the encyclopedia. Luis.
No, just to, I think it's even difficult for us to imagine the size of this revolution. I mean, we are talking about a world who had been, under the power of the Catholic Church for like 15, 1700 years. And then come this Illuminist movement and the Encyclopedists saying, well, things do not depend on the church. The world does not belong to the church. So this is huge. This is, I think we cannot even imagine the size of this tide that came. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think it's important for us to reinforce the importance of this era, this time in what happened there in France, and for us to understand why France was the most important place in terms of advancement of the world in the 1800s and 1900s. It all starts there with these encyclopedists. And then, of course, we have the French Revolution. So, when we talk about why Spiritism started in France, and again, a reminder, today is 164 days as years of the publication of the Spirit's book, April 18, 1857. So this is the days today. We all should pay our homages to the Allan Kardec's publication of the Spirit's book. And why did it start in France? Because France was the center of the world, really the center of the world. That's why the Spirit's book came, and Allan Kardec was born in France in 1804, because that's where this it had the opportunity to spread to the rest of the world. Anyone else here?
Yeah, I just wonder, of course, just wondering, thinking out loud, if those encyclopedists are in reality the reincarnation of the classic philosophers, not talking about Plato, Socrates, but the ones who are students of Plato, students of Socrates, of Aristotle, who actually reincarnated at that specific location with that specific mission. And even more than that, if that's not a prerequisite for the upcoming of the Spiritist doctrine.
We can only imagine that it has to be, right, Elmo, because the ideas for such big contributions and ideas to be brought to humanity has to be something related to those that were already working in the past with this, right? So yeah, I would imagine so.
Yes, and I totally support Elmo's reasoning. I don't think a tide like that could have happened without, a set of things put in motion by elevated spirits. I mean, it's just too huge to happen, by itself, in my opinion. Elmo's opinion is actually.
Yeah. Someone is raising a hand. Yes, go ahead.
This is Sue in Arizona. Thank you,
Hi.
Wow.
Hi, Sue. How are you?
Pretty good, thank you. I do not have this book yet, but I ordered it, and it'll be here on Wednesday. I am curious about a question. This is all very interesting. About, I don't even know if the whole world is in this bubble that I'm in, but I grew up very secular family and culture and education, very materialist. And nobody, I started having these spiritual experiences, nobody believed them. They thought I was insane. But I was assuming that, like, Hollywood and a lot of American culture is this way. And I don't know, how much it's spread around the world where there is no belief in the spirit realm at all. It's entirely secular and material. And I'm wondering if the roots of that are in this revolution, in those encyclopedias, if that sort of turned to complete secular and materialism, if that is related to what we're talking about.
Yeah, it's a very good question, and we can only wonder here. But our understanding is that because we have been dominated in history by church and imposed by church for so many centuries, you move to the other extreme, right? So when you start freeing yourself from the domination and the imposition of church in the 18th and 19th century, you move to the other extreme, which is the rejection of anything related to spirituality and to God and to religion, that's why Spiritism tries to bring it to the middle, which is a combination of spirituality and science. But what you have today throughout the world, what I see is, the vast majority of the world still believes in, we can call them everyone that believes that we don't, that not everything ends when we die, can be called spiritualists in a sense, right? Because you believe in the survival of the soul. Even if you have no idea how it survives, if you have no idea what happens after the physical body dies, you have a belief that it doesn't end there. So if you look throughout the world, the vast majority believes that the soul survives the death of the physical body. In the US, it's above 80% of people that believe that there is something after. Of course, in Europe is less, it's 70%. China is less because there is no religion, but they still are spiritual. But in Latin America and in the Latin countries, it's like the US, it's like 90%, 85, 90%. So the majority of the world still has some form of spiritual beliefs. What you are seeing is more and more people moving away from organized religions because they don't feel comfortable with the impositions of the organized religions. But and more we see people looking for reasonable explanations of the spiritual world, of what happens to us, make sense of God and of religion. So a big part of these believers are comfortable with their beliefs and don't question. So the evangelicals, when they talk about spirits, they think that all spirits are that communicate are the evil spirits. So, but at the same time, they believe in the Holy Spirit. The other churches, I know that the mainstream Jewish, they don't talk about the afterlife. You have the sects of the Jewish religion, the Kabbalah, talking about studying the spiritual world and a lot of similarities with Spiritism. The Muslims, they talk about the afterlife as a series of punishments and rewards in the afterlife. So they believe in the afterlife. But what is lacking is a deeper study and understanding of what really happens in the afterlife. Because what you see is people saying, nobody knows what happens on the other side. A lot of people say that. Nobody knows what happens on the other side. And, every time I read someone saying that, I kind of laugh inside and say, well, we do know. We have a lot of information on what happens on the other side. We have a lot of sources but the choice to believe and to accept and to go further and study those answers, the vast majority of people in the world are too concerned with their day-to-day lives and what's happening in their present existence to concern. They are all afraid of death, but so they put it aside and do not want to discuss it, do not want to try to understand. And again, what can we do? What we can do is what we're doing: studying, trying to learn, trying to prepare, try to spread the word for those that are interested in listening. For those that are not interested, it's out there. Eventually, more and more nowadays, it's out there in the internet, in the TVs, in the videos, and you have a lot of information. You have this series, Surviving Death on Netflix that you can watch and see a lot of what's being done out there. But so I don't know if I answered your question, but I think that it's a lot of there's not a simple answer. There's a lot of different things happening that makes people not believers or makes people reject the interest in studying the afterlife or what happens.
Like, can I tell a little?
Yes,
something
Elmo,
interesting
go
that
ahead.
happened to me this week, and I think that illustrates your point very well. In our group of PAs, it might be about 18 of us. There is myself, an spiritist. There is two Muslim, one practitioner. There is two Jewish, one practitioner, the other one just Jewish. And all of them basically have absolutely no religion or never talk about it, as if spirituality does not exist. So this week I admitted a patient. The patient came in for a craniotomy for a section of a brain lesion, metastatic. And I went to get the history, and he had lung cancer that was treated with endoscopy followed by radiation therapy, and everything was going well. And at one point, he got an MRI of the brain. So my question in the history is, why did your doctor request an MRI of the brain? What happened? And they said, no, the doctor did not ask for it. I asked for it. Okay, so what led you to get an MRI of your brain? I need to get an MRI of the brain. Yeah, but why? Did you have headaches? Did you have seizures? Did you have some weakness? Did you have some visual change? What led you to think to get an MRI? He said, absolutely not. I never had any symptoms, but I knew I had to get an MRI. And people don't get MRIs like that. You need to go through your primary care doctor. You have to be approved. The MRI is an expensive test. He got his MRI with absolutely no indication. And then Xavier has multiple brain lesions on that MRI. I found that fascinating. I came back to our room, and there was about 6 of us in the room, including this one Jewish non-practitioner. And everybody else was the non-religious, I don't care about this kind of stuff. And I told that story and said, isn't that amazing how this guy just got an MRI with no reason? And the Jewish girl said, it's not no reason. I do believe, and I'm certain that his guardian angel told him to do it. That voice was his guardian angel told him to do it. And all of the 5 over there agreed with her. They absolutely non-religious, non-spirituality whatsoever. No one disagreed. They all agreed with her. At least outside. Maybe if they were just agreeing to be nice, I don't know. But verbally, all of them agreed with her. I found that extremely fascinating, the fact that all these non-religious people, non-spirituality, I'm too busy making money. When that story was presented, they all agreed that there was a spiritual force that made this guy going and fight to get an MRI.
That's
Wow. Thank you, Elmo. Thank you, John. Thank you very much.
That's fascinating. And you see, right? Every time I hear something like that, Elmo, I always wonder, right? So she said it was the guardian angel.
The guardian angel.
And yeah, and ends there. Why she wouldn't research a little bit more? Well, guardian angel. Okay, so what's this guardian angel? It always strikes me why they stop there. They say something and they don't look for answers. They don't research a little bit. Maybe she does, and I'm not. I don't know here.
Yeah, but that's exactly your point. Is that the innate belief in something that transcends matter is there in almost all of us. Almost all of us have that innate sense of a spirituality. We just don't really care to investigate, to work on it.
Yeah. Thanks, Elmo. Thanks, Sue. Luis, you had something?
Yes, if I might, just complementing your excellent replies to her question. I think it's incorrect to polarize the Encyclopedist Illuminist movement with spiritualism. Or I think the Illuminism and the Encyclopedist movement, they were against the power of the church. It was a power struggle. I fail to believe that the church was not or had not been materialistic, extremely materialistic for hundreds of years. Just it spoke about mysticism and dogmas and etc. as a power mechanism. So we are not talking about different points in a dial. Materialism existed, and it's something that is there. The Illuminist movement was towards reason, towards freedom of the church, towards tolerance, towards individual freedom against dominance from the church as a control mechanism. So I don't think it was a struggle of materialism against spiritualism, my personal opinion, and I think it's subsided by facts.
Yeah, I agree with you. Actually, the separation, the scientific rejection of religion and spirituality only happened towards the 19th century. At the time of the Illuminism and the Encyclopedists, no, they were, as you were absolutely correct. They were not trying to negate the church or negate God. They were just trying to separate and bring reason, bring thought, bring study to it. The scientific denial of religion and everything spiritual came later, came in the 19th century, and it was a couple of generations after these encyclopedists. You're right on that, yes. So I misspoke that we finished talking about the US. I forgot that we had this American independence here, the last chapter. So, but let's talk a little bit about America again, because that's very important also.
Okay. American independence. The ennobling ideas of the Encyclopedists and their social theories were welcomed most openly in the English colonies of North America, which were organized and educated in the spirit of freedom of their homeland's parliamentarianism. Thus, the invisible world used this great opportunity to implement the grand democratic principles proclaimed by the philosophers and thinkers of the 18th century. And when England failed to apply to her colonies the grand principle that she herself had affirmed, no one should pay taxes without having voted for them, the Americans decided to proclaim their political independence. After a few incidents with England, they celebrated their emancipation on July 4th, 1776, and later drew up their constitution in Philadelphia, which became the model for the democratic codes of the future.
So when we talk about the Encyclopedists and there's new social theories, they had a huge influence here in this country, right? What was happening here in the English colonies, and again, just a reminder for those that don't fully know the history of this country. What we had here were several English colonies. Was not a country in itself, different from, for instance, from Brazil, that it was a big country divided in parts, but all under one government. Here, each colony had its own government, and it was like a series of small countries, which were not countries, were colonies. So Massachusetts, New York, Maryland, up to I believe North Carolina, Pennsylvania, which was the most important one, the biggest one at that time, New Jersey, they were all colonies, independent from each other in the political sense, but English colonies of North America. Of course, a lot of, because they were all together in the same place, and they were all English colonies, there were no barriers and there were free movement amongst them, but they were not, they did not have a central government. And this played a big role in what's it's called today the United States of America, because really it were separate states that decided to get together to fight against the English domination, and ended up declaring the independence on July 4th, 1776. But if you know the history of this country, the first president of this country, George Washington, became president in 1789. So for 13 years, they still tried to survive as independent states from each other. But in the end, they decided that it was more important for them to unite forces and become one country, because in that way they could defend themselves against the English and the French that were trying to prevent the independence and everything. If you want to learn more about all this history of this country, I recommend the series John Adams. That's a series that has like 15 years old, that came originally on HBO, one of the forefathers of this country. It explains very well what happened at that time and how this all, the independence of this country happened. But how this all happened, it all started very, very simple, right? Emmanuel says here, no one should pay taxes without having voted for them. But the key phrase there, that was the movement that originated the American Revolution, is called no taxation without representation. What does this mean? It was one of the main reasons of the grievances of the American colonies against Great Britain, because the colonies were not represented in the British Parliament. Any taxes imposed on the colonies, on the colonies here, like the Stamp Act and the Townshend Act, they thought they were unconstitutional, because they didn't have the right to impose taxes without having representation, those that were affected by the taxes being represented. So the belief that the people of a country should be represented in the government, it started in the English Civil War, right? That it was in 1642 to 1651, a series of civil wars that between the parliamentarians and the royalists. And that origin the separate, the institution of the parliament has a more active role in the government of the British Empire. But the slogan, no taxation without representation, appeared in the London magazine in 1768. So it was something that was accepted by the people in Britain, right, in England. So the parliament, they control the trade and the taxes on imports and exports since the 100 years before that. So when the Bill of Rights that forbid the imposition of taxes without the consent of parliament, the colonies here started complaining that they had no voice, no representation in the parliament. So it started as a discussion that they should have representation in the parliament. And this started creating a lot of back and forth between the Americans at that time. And then eventually an assembly in Massachusetts was the first ever to take exception to the right of parliament to impose duties and taxes on the colonies. And that started the movement that would end up causing the independence, the proclamation of their emancipation of the colonies in July 4, 1776, which is the national day here in this country. And they started starting the constitution of this country, which is still a model, as they say, for democratic codes everywhere in the world. When we talk about the United States Constitution, it was came into force in 1789, meaning when George Washington became the president. For the first 13 years, the 13 states tried to ratify it without coming into an agreement. The concept of federalism was being discussed at that time. And again, people outside this country find it very odd that each state has their own taxes, and you have the sales tax. Some states have, some have not. You pay taxes to your states because the rest of the world you pay the national tax, and that's it, right? But in this country, because each state kept a lot of independence in a lot of matters and make their own decisions in a lot of matters. That's why you have different laws in different states, and the states have a lot more authority on controlling their own destinies than the federal government has, which is different from the rest of the world, where the federal government imposes and controls most of the laws and regulations everywhere in the country. But these all originated in this independency and the 13 original states that wanted to keep as much independence as they could from a federal government. So when they decided that they needed a federal government and a president, they kept a lot of the independence that remains until today. And the constitution that is used nowadays is still the same constitution from 1789 that has been amended 27 times. And we know, we hear a lot of comments on the First Amendment, the Third Amendment, some freedoms that these amendments bring, that are all discussed a lot. But the First Amendment, it's the one that protects the freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of assembly. This famous Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms, right? And other are less spoken. But for instance, the Seventh Amendment provides for the right to a jury trial and in civil lawsuits. So all these amendments that makes up the constitution of this country that is still used as a model for many other countries throughout the world. Just a side note here, the only country that doesn't have a written constitution is exactly the UK, that has a constitution that is a constitution made of a series of laws, but doesn't have a written constitution. Most of other countries in the world have written constitutions like the constitution here in this country. So no taxation without representation was the basis of what happened in this country, ended up causing the emancipation of the United States from the domination of the England. Not, you know, and the main responsible for the independence in this country, they had a lot of disagreement amongst them. Benjamin Franklin, for instance, he wasn't a first converter to the idea of independence. He had a very close relationship with France and with Europe. In the end, he became convinced that the importance of the independence, and he is considered one of the forefathers of this country. But Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, for instance, were very close friends and then became enemies. So all these political disputes that happened in this country amongst those that were responsible for independence originated in their alliances either with England or with France, and their thoughts on how this should be, if the United States should be more like France, more like England. And the Constitution was drawn in Philadelphia because Philadelphia at that time was the largest city in the US. And it was, I believe it was the first capital. They started building Washington later, but the beginning in the government, I think it was in Philadelphia, if I'm not mistaken. So that's a little bit of the history of this country. You know, me, a foreigner, talking about it. I hope I didn't offend any of you locals, but I'm trying to, based on my understanding and a little bit of what we learn from the spiritual world in terms of what Emmanuel brings to us. Okay, comments, questions?
Okay. John.
Yes, Carol.
Yeah, excellent. It sort of brings me back to my studies of government and civics. Thank you, excellent. Just in addition, from what I understand, I think there was a strong influence of the Masonic order within some of the framers of the Constitution, some of the founding fathers. So even they say the arrangement or the layout of Washington, D.C. was very much influenced by the Masonic lodges and the Masonic order, just for what it's worth.
Yeah, I believe I heard that, but I don't really have much more knowledge on it. But I heard it before. I don't know if anyone else knows anything else about it. I don't have anything, any more knowledge than what you brought. I just heard it. So
in a certain way, there was, in a way, a spiritual influence among the founding fathers and so forth. So that's always interesting, I find.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you brought religion, right? Religion was a very important part of the beginnings of this country, right? The first immigrations were the pioneers here that were escaping religious persecution. We mentioned this last month. Especially what was happening in England with the changes in religion there, with the church being part of the king being the head of church. This caused a lot of people to escape to America, to escape religious persecution. And And of course, the religious beliefs brought to this country were very strong in the building of the constitution, in the building of this country. But you see the amendments, right? The freedom of religion, the First Amendment that was completed in December 15, 1791. It's important when you bring freedom of religion. It's a concept that at that time was practically non-existent in any other places, right? We're still in Europe fighting wars on religion. So many of the articles of the Constitution in this country are very advanced for their time, and they are up to today. They are very modern in a sense, right? So the founding fathers of this country clearly were evolved spirits that came to establish a new model for democracy in the world. Again, always reminding ourselves that we are all imperfect spirits, and we are all influenced by our own personal ideas, and in the end, that's what's caused a lot of the issues that and consequences that we have up to this day, right? A discussion on all these, some of these amendments that still exists. Just as a curiosity, the 13th Amendment was the one that abolished slavery and involuntary servitude. That was in January. It was proposed in January 31st of 1865 by Abraham Lincoln, and finally completed by the end of the year in December of 1865. Again, a lot of the Constitution, when we talk about we are all the same under God, was not really what was practiced in this country for a very long time, and many people say until today. And we can see a lot of discrimination still existing today in this country. So we understand that what's written in the law doesn't always is practice in our daily lives. So that's why we still have these conflicts and movements and discussions and polarization. Okay. Any other comments, questions on this comments on this great nation of ours? Okay, so we move to a different chapter, the French Revolution, which is very, very relevant also to what the world followed, because the consequences of the French Revolution influenced the whole world in the coming centuries, and the influence of the ideas in France and the consequences of the French Revolution that we started studying a little bit with the Encyclopedists, but we are going to go a little bit deeper now in the French Revolution to understand the importance and what did it bring to us. And as we come closer to the appearance of Spiritism that we are going to get there very soon, by the end of this chapter 22, we need to understand the origins of everything that happened what's happening in France at that time. So Zoraida, yes, take us to the French Revolution in the 18th century.
France in the 18th century. American independence stoked the liveliest enthusiasm in the spirit of the French, demeaned by the most pressing hardships after the extravagant reign of Louis XV. The astonishing amount of unbridled luxury and abuses of the clergy and nobility had created an atmosphere for all the free and noble ideas of the Encyclopedists and philosophers in the tormented minds of the people. The situation of the proletarian and farming classes was characterized by most heinous poverty. Taxes assailed all the centers of production, whereas the nobles and priests were exempt. The States General had not convened since 1614, which ended up giving more strength to the monarchical absolutionists. Louis XVI's efforts to invite highly practical and eminent minds such as Turgot and Malesherbes to collaborate in his administration proved useless. This benevolent monarchy, who did everything he could to raise the royal house from its lamentable downfall as a result of his predecessors' excesses, could hardly guess in his limited experience with life and people that a new era was beginning for the political world of the West, the dolorous transformations that would demand his very life. The Estates General finally convened in Paris in 1789 with enormous misunderstandings of exploiting among its members, notwithstanding the goodwill and cooperation of Nectar on behalf of the king, with the gathering transformed into the National Constituent Assembly. After numerous incidents, the revolution began with Mirabeau's speech.
Mirabeau's
speech.
Mirabeau's speech. Yeah, a lot of French names here. Yes. Sorry.
It's okay.
So, the French Revolution. The French Revolution really refers to the period that starts with the States General here, when Emmanuel says the States General had not convened since 1614. What is the State General? The State General was a general assembly representing the French states of the realm, the clergy, the nobility, and the commoners. So it made the decisions on what the decisions about taxes, the decisions about laws in France. Now, behind every revolution, you are going to find what? People struggling to find jobs, food, struggling to survive. Because when people have nothing to lose, nothing else to lose, or very little to lose, then they revolt and they go after the established power. So what happened in France before Louis XVI, Louis XIV is the height of absolutism in France, and the dominance of France as the monarchy in France. And then you have Louis XV, who was very extravagant, a lot of expenses, money used in constructions, the Palace of Versailles, which became the government place. So the debt, French debt, was rising to the roof. There was no employment for a lot of people. The Catholic Church controlled a lot of the land and controlled the government. So when Louis XVI took over, he inherited a very dangerous and complicated situation. So for you to have an idea, the French population increased from 1700 to 1789, when you have the start of the French Revolution, from 18 million people to 26 million people. So almost 50% more people. And of course, a large number of unemployed, sharp increases in food prices, a lot of years of bad harvests that always contributes, right? So finally, when Louis XVI called for the States General in 1789, it was too late. The revolution was already moving on. He had very little knowledge and understanding of the outside world. We all learn and probably watch some movies about Marie Antoinette, his wife, and the extravagant life that she led. She got married to him when she was a teenager, and she had no idea of the outside world. They lived isolated from the world in Versailles. The main things were happening in Paris, and Versailles is outside Paris, a good couple of hours at that time by horse. Nowadays it's like 30-40 minutes by train. So they really lost contact with what was happening with the so-called commoners in France. So that was the beginning of the revolt that was also fed by the ideas that were originated by the Encyclopedists: independence of the church, revolt against the domination of the church. So the French Revolution, in the end, it took 10 years. Started with the States General in 1789 and ended in November 1799, when Napoleon became the first consul of France, and it's considered where it ended the French Revolution. During 10 years, a lot of things happened, a lot of blood spilled, but the official date of the French Revolution, which is still to this day commemorated in France as the start of the modern France, is with the storming of the Bastille in July 14th, 1789. The Bastille was a prison. That the rumor was that all the members of there was the symbol of the royal authority. In the end, was not really. There were only 8 prisoners there, and of these 8 prisoners, none of them were very important. Marquis of Sade was there, and they stormed the Bastille, killed the guards, killed everyone, and that is considered the beginning of the French Revolution, and is commemorated until these days. But really, the intention of invading the Bastille was to overthrow the royalty, and the royalty was not there. But it's the case of, it's the date that is considered the beginning of the French Revolution and the beginning of modern France. Poor Louis XVI tried by all means to survive the revolution, ended up abdicating of his power completely and gave the power to the so-called assembly. But the assembly was completely divided between those that wanted to keep the monarchy, for the ones that want the republic, the ones that were in the middle, which were the largest number. Louis XVI ended up ceding more and more power to the assembly, but eventually what happened was the countries outside England and Prussia became worried about what was happening in France, and concerned that the revolution would contaminate into their own countries and will cause their own governments to fall, right? So a lot of them during these 10 years of the French Revolution ended up declaring war against France. And French, you had the what's so-called the revolution wars that lasted actually until 1802, which were wars. There were sweeping military conflicts resulting from the French Revolution. And when France fought against Great Britain, the Holy Roman Empire, Prussia, Russia, and several other monarchies. So on the middle of these wars, at a certain point, a group thought that Louis XVI had allied himself with foreign powers to overthrow the assembly. And eventually they were able to convince the majority of the assembly that that was the case. And that's why he was executed in 1792, which ended up the royalty as it had existed in France. Of course, during the next century, they would have Napoleon as an emperor. They would have the monarchy reestablished for some years, and then they had again the Republic. So a lot of back and forth between in the 19th century in France between regiments, and finally they ended up being a republic as they are until today. So Marie Antoinette was executed a couple of years later after Louis XVI, because we are going to see there was the terror regime that took over after a certain period, because what happens in these revolutions is that if you know, there is always the dark forces and the dark leaders that want to dominate and to become dictators. And that was, you know, centered in the figure of Robespierre that we're going to study later. But in this beginning here, what Emmanuel talks about, the monarchy trying to survive and trying to, the Louis XVI trying to resist the end of the monarchy through several changes back and forth between ministers, between other members. And Mirabeau here, Emmanuel talks about the revolution begin with Mirabeau's speech. Mirabeau's speech, he asks for the end of the absolutism and the end of the dominance of the church, but the preservation of the monarchy. So he tried to preserve the monarchy, and in the end, he played an important role in what is called the Declarations of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, which is the basis of the French National Constituent Assembly in 1789, which is a human civil rights document from the French Revolution that has a lot of inspiration on the American, the US Constitution, a lot of influence from Thomas Jefferson, who was an important part of all this revolution that was happening in France. The connections with France in the US were mainly done by Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin was the ambassador in France after the independence of the United States, and France was a big supporter of the beginning of the independence of the United States, of course, against the domination of the UK, because they had their own personal interests in fighting against the UK. Okay, so that's the French Revolution in a nutshell. I don't know if anyone has any comments or questions here on the French Revolution. It's really worth studying and trying to understand better, because it really is it's the revolution, the French Revolution, that inspired campaigns like the abolition of slavery. Was something that was the origin was in the French Revolution. The universal right to vote for all adult citizens was something that came with the French Revolution also. So the historians today, they regard the revolution as one of the most important events in recent history of humanity. Okay.
Okay.
Questions, comments? You know, I don't want to go any further because I think we should dedicate the whole day to study the French Revolution and all the details of it. So I'm not going to go into the next item, and we'll start next month again with the French Revolution, and we are going to go a little bit deeper into studying it. But I just tried to give you an idea of the importance of the French Revolution and the origins, the causes, and why it happened. So I don't know if anyone has any comments, questions here. Okay, you want to finish class early? No problem. We finished class early today. So yes, Luis.
I have a totally unrelated question, but I don't know if it's appropriate to use this time for this.
Sure. If it's if we don't have the time, we transfer for next week's Q&A.
Someone mentioned today the Masons, and it's something that I'm very curious about. Is there a non-empty intersection between the Masons and the Spiritist movement?
I don't know the answer. I will research and come back to you next Sunday. Okay. I don't know if Carol, you know anything about it? No, right?
Not really technically, because there's more literature available now on the internet. It used to be that these were considered secret societies and the information would be passed and circulated only among its members. And I believe it was men only, as I understand it. So, you know, you can research it a bit more. There is much more literature about it now, but I don't have a specific answer to your question, Luis. I just made an assumption that there was the inflow of spiritual influence in the lives of the founding fathers. That was my understanding. So if I can leave it at that.
Next Sunday then, Johnny.
I'll do some research. Yes, definitely. I'll do some research and I'll ask around. Thank you. Okay, so next Sunday, as we mentioned, we're going to have our Q&A. So bring your questions. If you want to send them first, you can always send to me or to Elmo before. So today, again, is 164 years of the first release of the Spirit's book in 1857. Yesterday, we had a very interesting live with the members of the United States Spiritist Federation and the local federations talking about the Spirit's book. If you missed, I highly recommend that you watch it. It will give you a very good introduction to the Spirit's book. It was a very interesting presentation. Of course, we covered the introduction, covered each of the books, the 4 books of the Spirit's book. You know, it was really interesting. You should watch it. So, Carol, can you do our final prayer?
Sure. Thank you very much. Thank you, John. Thank you, Elmo. Thank you, everyone. Infinite Creator, goodness, grace, love, light, and assistance from our spiritual benefactors. We are grateful to be together today for our study of On the Way to the Light, chapter 21. We are grateful for the information that we have shared, we have received, and that we have a better understanding of some of the influences, such as Greece, Rome, and France, which played very important roles in the establishment in the Americas, especially in Northern America, in the US. We are grateful that we can continue to find out more in-depth information through our studies. We give thanks to the spiritual benefactors, the good spirits, the mentors, and those who are assisting us today to receive the love, light, and healing. We are grateful for the studies that we can share through the vehicle of connectivity through Zoom. May we continue throughout the week with our prayers, with our studies, with our mindfulness, so that we can continue to keep our thoughts elevated and our hearts open. May we share what we can with others through our discernment. May we always keep a loving light within our hearts, and may we be able to engender and serve others and be of service through our charity. We give thanks for what we have received, for the blessings, for the healings, and for the continued unity of our Spiritist community. May we continue with prayers, studies, and mindfulness as we go forth during the week. We humbly ask for the love and light of Christ within, and may it go with us each day. May we continue to be beacons of light, and may we humbly ask for safety and protection as we go forth now to family, friends, and loved ones. Go forth now in peace, so be it.